3 months passed, and I had begun to think of my encounter with the crying lioness as a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had written up my observations for the Journal of Animal Behavior, but I knew the scientific community would be skeptical. Claims of animals displaying complex emotions like grief and gratitude were often dismissed as anthropomorphism. But everything changed on January 18, 2024, when I heard familiar footsteps approaching my clinic at dawn, looked outside, and couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was her, the same lioness with the distinctive scar above her left eye. But she wasn't alone. She had brought her cub, now a healthy young juvenile, and something else that made my heart skip a beat. She was carrying a small bundle in her mouth. Another cub. But this one wasn't hers. As she approached my clinic, I could see the tears streaming down her face again. But this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of desperation mixed with hope. She had found another dying cub somewhere in the vast Serengeti, and she had brought it to me. She had remembered that I could heal the wounded, and she was asking for my help again. The cub she carried was in even worse condition than her own had been months earlier. It was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and covered in infected wounds. This was clearly an orphan that had been struggling to survive on its own. The lioness placed the dying cub at my feet and backed away just as she had done before. But this time her own healthy cub remained by her side, watching the proceedings with curious eyes. I immediately began emergency treatment on the orphaned cub. The little male was barely clinging to life, and it took every skill I had developed over 15 years to stabilize him. As I worked, I could hear the lioness vocalizing softly outside my tent. She was talking to her own cub, explaining what was happening in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow recognized as maternal instruction. The next few days were critical. The orphaned cub responded slowly to treatment, but his will to live was remarkable. During his recovery, something extraordinary happened. The lioness began bringing food to my clinic, fresh kills that she would leave outside my tent before retreating to her watching position. She was providing for the orphaned cub as if he were her own child. But the most incredible development came when the orphaned cub was strong enough to venture outside. The lioness immediately began grooming him, treating him with the same maternal care she showed her biological offspring. She had adopted him. A wild lioness had not only sought human help for an orphaned cub, but had then integrated him into her family unit. Dr. James Whitfield from Oxford University arrived to document what was happening at my clinic. He was one of the world's leading experts on lion behavior, and he was initially convinced that I was misinterpreting normal animal interactions. But after witnessing the lioness's behavior firsthand, he became one of the most vocal advocates for recognizing the complex emotional lives of wild animals. The breakthrough moment came when the lioness brought me a third cub. This time, it wasn't an orphan or an injured animal. It was a healthy cub from another pride. She had somehow convinced another mother to allow her to bring their offspring to meet me. She was introducing me to the extended lion community as a trusted ally and healer. Over the following months, word spread through the lion population of the Serengeti. I began receiving visits from other lionesses, all following the same protocol that the crying mother had established. Approach the clinic, place the sick or injured cub at my feet, back away, and wait. They had developed a cultural behavior pattern for seeking human medical assistance. The scientific implications were staggering. We were witnessing the evolution of a new form of interspecies cooperation in real time. Lions were not only learning to trust humans, but were teaching this behavior to their offspring and sharing it with other prides. The crying lioness had become the founder of a new tradition in lion society. But the most emotional moment came 6 months after our first encounter. The lioness arrived at my clinic with her original cub, now a strong, healthy juvenile. But this time, she wasn't seeking help. She was making a social call. She wanted to show me how well her child was thriving and to maintain the bond we had formed. Through shared grief and healing, as I watched the young lion play fearlessly around my clinic while its mother dozed peacefully in the shade, I realized that we had created something unprecedented. A relationship based on mutual respect, trust, and understanding that transcended the traditional boundaries between human and predator. The crying lioness had taught me that love, grief, and hope are universal languages that every mother understands. Regardless of species. The story took an unexpected turn when researchers from National Geographic arrived to film a documentary about our unusual partnership. They wanted to capture the moment when the lioness brought her next patient to my clinic. We didn't have to wait long. 3 days into filming, she arrived with twins. 2 cubs from different litters, both suffering from the same respiratory infection that was spreading through the local population. The footage of me treating wild lion cubs while their adoptive mother watched protectively became one of the most viewed wildlife videos in internet history. But for me, the real significance wasn't the viral fame or scientific recognition. It was the quiet moment when the lioness approached me after the cameras stopped rolling and gently licked my hand. She was telling me that our relationship existed beyond human curiosity or documentation. It was real, and it was permanent. Today, 18 months after that first encounter with a crying lioness, my mobile clinic has become a recognized medical facility for the lion population of the Serengeti. I've treated over 40 cubs and formed relationships with 12 different prides. The behavior that started with one desperate mother has spread throughout the youth ecosystem, creating a new model for human-wildlife coexistence. The lioness who started it all still visits regularly. She's now a grandmother, and her extended family includes cubs from multiple generations, all of whom view me as a trusted member of their community. When I see her approaching my clinic with that familiar, confident stride, I'm reminded of how far we've come from that first day when she sat crying in the grass with her dying child. The tears she shed that day weren't just expressions of grief. They were the beginning of a communication that would bridge 2 worlds. She taught me that when a mother is desperate enough, she will overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming to seek help wherever she can find it. And sometimes that help comes from the most unlikely source, a human who is willing to see past species boundaries to recognize a mother's love. What happened next after she brought her cub to me didn't make me collapse from shock or fear. It made me collapse from the overwhelming realization that I had been chosen to be part of something bigger than myself. A partnership between human and predator that was rewriting the rules of what was possible in the natural world. The crying lioness had given me the greatest gift of my career, the chance to be a bridge between 2 species and to prove that compassion has no boundaries when it comes to saving a life. Every day I wake up in the Serengeti, I'm grateful for that moment when a desperate mother taught me that love is the most powerful force in nature. Her tears opened a door between our worlds that can never be closed, and through that door has flowed a river of trust, understanding, and hope that continues to grow stronger with each passing day. I've been a wildlife veterinarian in the Serengeti for 15 years, and I thought I'd seen everything until the day a lioness taught me that grief has no boundaries between species. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think. You know about animal emotions and the lengths a mother will go to save her child. I'm Dr. Rebecca Martinez, and this is the story that broke my heart and rebuilt it in ways I never thought possible. It was October 15th, 2023, around 4 p.m., when I heard the sound that still haunts my dreams. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It's something I had never heard from a lion before. It was crying. Actual sobbing coming from somewhere near my mobile clinic. I grabbed my medical bag and followed the sound, thinking maybe I'd find an injured tourist or a lost Maasai child. What I found instead was a massive lioness sitting 20 meters from my tent with tears streaming down her face. She wasn't alone. At her feet lay a small cub, maybe 8 weeks old, and even from a distance, I could see something was terribly wrong. The cub wasn't moving. Its tiny body was limp, and its breathing was so shallow I could barely detect it. But what stopped me? In my tracks wasn't the dying cub, it was the lioness herself. She was looking directly at me with an expression of pure desperation, and those tears, those impossible tears, were flowing like a river down her golden fur dot in 15 years of working. With African wildlife, I had never seen a lion cry. I knew they were capable of complex emotions, but this was something beyond anything documented in scientific literature. This mother was experiencing grief so profound that it manifested in the most human way possible. She was weeping for her dying child, and somehow she knew I was her only hope. I approached slowly, keeping my movements calm and predictable. The lioness didn't retreat or show any signs of aggression. Instead, she gently picked up her cub and took 3 steps toward me before placing the tiny body on the ground between us. Then she backed away and sat down, maintaining eye contact the entire time. She was asking for help. A wild lioness was entrusting me with her most precious possession. The cub was a female, as she was in critical condition. Her body temperature was dangerously low, and I could see infected wounds on her tiny legs. She had been attacked by something, probably hyenas, and the infection was spreading rapidly through her small system. Without immediate intervention, she would be dead within hours. But treating a wild lion cub while its mother watched was unlike anything I had ever attempted. I looked up at the lioness and spoke softly, explaining what I needed to do. I know it sounds insane, but I told her I would have to take her cub into my clinic to save her life. The lioness tilted her head as if she was listening to every word. When I gently lifted the cub, she made a sound that will haunt me forever. It was a whimper of pure maternal anguish mixed with desperate hope. Inside my clinic, I worked frantically to stabilize the cub. Her vital signs were weak, and the infection was more severe than I had initially thought. I started her on aggressive antibiotic therapy, administered 4 fluids, and used warming blankets to raise her body temperature. Through my tent window, I could see the lioness hadn't moved. She was maintaining her vigil, waiting for news about her child. The first night was touch and go. The cub's fever spiked dangerously high, and there were moments when I thought I was going to lose her. But slowly, gradually, she began to respond to treatment. Her breathing became stronger, her temperature stabilized, and around dawn she opened her eyes for the first time since her arrival. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but I knew the real test would be reuniting her with her mother. Stepped outside to update the lioness on her cub's progress. She immediately stood up and approached to within 5 meters of me. I could see the desperate hope in her eyes, the way she searched my face for any sign of good news. I held up the cub so she could see her baby was alive and alert. The lioness made a sound that can only be described as a sob of relief. She was still crying, but now they were tears of joy. Over the next week, the cub's recovery was remarkable. Her appetite returned, her playfulness emerged, and she began to show all the signs of a healthy young lion. But during this entire time, the lioness never left. She had taken up residence outside my clinic, creating a protective perimeter around the area. She was standing guard, making sure nothing could harm her cub while it recovered. On the 8th day, I knew it was time for the reunion. The cub was fully recovered and ready to return to the wild. I carried her outside, and the lioness immediately approached. What happened next was one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things I have ever witnessed. The mother began grooming her cub, checking every inch of her body, purring so loudly I could feel the vibrations through the ground. The cub nuzzled into her mother's warmth, completely content and unaware of how close she had come to death. But then something happened that made me question everything. I thought I knew about animal intelligence and emotion. The lioness looked directly at me and began to vocalize in a pattern I had never heard before. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was almost like she was trying to speak. She was trying to tell me something important, and her urgency was unmistakable. She picked up her cub and began walking away, but after about 20 meters, she stopped and looked back at me. She was asking me to follow. Against every instinct, the first had about maintaining safe distances from wild predators, I followed her. She led me through the tall grass for about half a mile until we reached a small clearing where I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were 3 more cubs lying motionless on the ground. The lioness had brought me to see the rest of her litter. They were all dead. They had succumbed to the same infection that had nearly killed the cub I had saved. The lioness walked to each tiny body and nuzzled them gently, making soft whimpering sounds. She was saying goodbye to her other children, and she wanted me to witness her grief. I knelt down beside the dead cubs and examined them. They had all died from the same bacterial infection, probably contracted during the hyena attack. If I had found them sooner, I might have been able to save them too. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical blow. This mother had lost 3 of her 4 children, and the one I had saved was all she had left in the world. The lioness approached me and did something that defied every law of predator behavior. She rubbed her massive head against my shoulder in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of gratitude and shared grief. She was thanking me for saving her last child, while also sharing her pain over the ones she had lost. In that moment, the barrier between human and animal dissolved completely. We were just 2 beings who understood loss and the desperate love of a parent. What happened next changed my life forever. The lioness led me back to where her surviving cub was playing, and then she did something unprecedented. She lay down and rolled onto her back, exposing her belly in the ultimate gesture of trust and submission. She was telling me that she considered me part of her family, that I had earned a place in her pride through my actions. I sat down beside her and gently placed my hand on her massive paw. She didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she looked at me with those intelligent eyes, and I swear I could see understanding there. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching her cub explore the world with the fearless curiosity that only comes from feeling completely safe and loved. As the sun began to set, the lioness stood up and gathered her cub. It was time for them to return to their territory. But before leaving, she approached me one final time and pressed her forehead against mine. It was a gesture of respect and gratitude that transcended species boundaries. She was telling me that she would never forget what I had done for her family. I watched them disappear into the tall grass and thought that would be the end of our story. A miraculous encounter that I would treasure for the rest of my life. But ultimately, a single moment in time. I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a relationship that would challenge everything the scientific community believed about animal intelligence and emotional capacity.